Hi. The critical methodology which I chose is extra-canonical Jewish texts. This is defined as both apocrypha and pseudepigrapha writings. Apocrypha means not accepted, while pseudo means mystery author. The Jewish apocrypha are books written in large part by Jews, especially during the Second Temple period, not accepted as sacred manuscripts when the Hebrew Bible was canonized. Some of these books are considered sacred by select Christians such as Catholics and are even included in their versions of the Old Testament. An example of such is the book of Judith, which focuses on a Jewish widow distraught by the faithlessness of neighbors upon Assyrian invasion. She then seduces and assassinates the Assyrian leader to secure victory and inspire faith within her Jewish community. This book is considered fictional and apocryphal. The Jewish apocrypha is distinct from the New Testament apocrypha as it only works within a Jewish theological framework. Pseudepigrapha are falsely attributed works whose claimed author is not the true author, or a work whose real author attributed it to a figure of the past, generally called a pseudo-author. The Odes of Solomon is considered pseudegraphical because it was not actually written by Solomon, but instead as a collection of early Jewish or early Christian hymns and poems, originally composed in non-Hebrew. Another example is the Gospel of Barnabas, which didn't show up until after the 2nd century BC. Historical books written from the era 300 BCE or before the Common Era and 300 CE Common Era, which is a 600-year span, such as the Maccabees, although rich in history, are not considered inspired. Therefore, they fall into this class of extra-canonical Jewish texts. When applying the method to a New Testament text, various canonical works accepted as scripture have since been re-examined and considered by modern scholars in the 19th century onward as likely pseudepigrapha. From the Old Testament, the book of Daniel directly claims to be written by the prophet Daniel, yet there are those who suspect that it was not written until centuries after his death. They reference the book only appearing in 2nd century BCE and onward. They claim the book to be an apocalypse wherein Daniel offers a series of predictions for the future meant to reassure the Jews of the period that the tyrant Antiochus Epiphanes would soon be overthrown. By backdating the book to the 6th century BCE and providing a series of correct prophecies of the history of the past 400 years, would have strengthened a later author's predictions of the coming fall of the Seleucid Empire. But when Jesus referenced Daniel's prophecy about the abomination which causes desolation, when he referenced this prophecy while discussing the temple period, the Jewish temple in Mark 13, he boldly made the claim of a futuristic event not inclusive with Epiphanes. Therefore, Jesus, who was called a historical figure by Tacitus, 55 to 117, he is considered the dean of Roman historians. He said he linked the name and origin of Christianity with Christus, who in the reign of Tiberius suffered death by the sentence of the procurator Pontius. There are some biblical scholars that believe only a handful of Paul's epistles to be genuine, considering some to be written by unknown people rather than the well-known biblical figure. However, other Christian scholars maintain that nothing known to be pseudepigraphica or was admitted to the New Testament canon. Two letters attributed to Simon Peter, traditionally called the Petrine epistles, have come under scrutiny as well. Many modern scholars contend that the second epistle was probably not written by Peter, speculating it to have been written in the early 2nd century, long after he died, although common thought of the first epistle seemed to be authentic. This is a quote. By far the best work on 2nd Peter and Jude is the exhaustive commentary written by Richard J. Bauckham. There's no relevant literature up to this time that Bauckham has not considered, and he even puts to good use his knowledge of Second Temple Judaism and some of the more recent Gnostic finds. Why he concluded that 2nd Peter is pseudonymous is still not clear to me. His evidence does not strike me as very convincing. Bauckham holds that Jude was written first and that 2nd Peter depended on Jude. This, I'll show in my bibliography, was from D.A. Carson, New Testament commentary. Regarding James, since the author does not indicate any familial relationship with Jesus, there are several different authors speculated also named James. However, most modern scholars tend to reject this line of reasoning. A similar problem presents itself with the Epistle of Jude. The writer names himself a brother to James, but is not clear which James is meant. According to Christian traditions, this is the same James as the author of the Epistle, James, who was allegedly the brother of Jesus. And so this Jude was also the brother of Jesus, despite the fact that he doesn't mention him in the text. How ironic would it be that Jesus, who Scripture mentions his brothers as being James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas in Matthew 13, how ironic it would be that they would not be considered the authors, and instead another brother combination of James and Jude would emerge to write these two books. Quote, it's quite interesting, too, that in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul points out that the Lord's brothers were traveling missionaries in Palestine. Much later, Julius Africanus said the relatives of Jesus spread the gospel throughout Palestine, starting in Nazareth. That's from N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright, the New Testament in its world, mentions the Epistle of James as a very controversial writing. Martin Luther called it the Epistle of Straw. Christologically, it doesn't say very much about Jesus at all, and some have even wondered if it's an old synagogue sermon that someone has dusted up and simply rehashed. Many scholars reject James's authorship of this letter, preferring it instead to see it as pseudegraphical. However, James, the brother of Jesus, is a plausible candidate. I mean, the author is very well versed in Jewish thought and Scripture. The author echoes or represents a substantial number of Jesus' teachings, quite a lot actually. The whole letter is replete with echoes and allusions to the Jesus traditions. There are none of the hallmarks of pseudonymous literature in the letter, like fictionalized elaborations that identify the author. To account for the good Greek of this letter, it is likely that James actually knew some Greek, and perhaps the letter was even first written in Aramaic and later translated into Greek. Again, this is N.T. Wright. Jude had his own controversies because he quotes from an apocryphal source, the Book of Enoch. And Enoch, also the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints. He attributes this writing to the actual Enoch. 14 Enoch, Adam. This description occurs in the Book of Enoch, as does the quotation which follows. This book was well known in New Testament days, and so the reference is relevant, again, by N.T. Wright. Actually, that's Donald Guthrie from the New Bible Commentary. Jude makes reference to the prophecies of judgment from Zechariah and also from 1 Enoch, and he sees them as a warning that are relevant to his readers. Jude quotes from the Assumption of Moses and the Book of Enoch, and may also be referring to other apocryphal works. Subsequently, when the church was formulating her canon, Paul himself quoted from extra-biblical Jewish writings, 1 Corinthians 10 and 2 Timothy 3, and even from heathen poets, as in the sermon at Athens. And much of what he said, or much of this was in use, Jude rather, was in use in the church in the early 2nd century. So even though the fabled Book of Enoch is considered extra-canonical Jewish text, it is still relevant. Although not all of Enoch's writings are considered inspired, some of the later Enoch attributions are likely pseudegraphical. As his time period was ancient history, yet his book kept expanding throughout history. But within a Jewish history, up until the time of Jesus, many considered it canon. Author Joel Green, from hearing the New Testament, suggests these New Testament writers were very familiar with the writings which bore the name Enoch, some possibly even coming directly from him. It is extremely probable that all New Testament writers read some extra-canonical Jewish literature, and some of them were very familiar with some of that literature. That's Joel Green as well. In addition, many of them would have known Jewish oral traditions. We know that the letter of Jude explicitly quotes part of the collection of Enoch literature and makes several allusions to other parts of Enoch literature. Green as well. Pros and cons. Green goes on to elaborate that apart from the Hebrew Bible itself and other documents such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were recently discovered by archaeologists, Green goes on to say that Jews had ceased to use these writings by the time that the Christian church was already well established. Even after most of the New Testament had been written, writings such as the Apocalypses of Ezra and Baruch were appropriated by Christians. These recent new discoveries, including the aforementioned Dead Sea Scrolls and other so-called pseudegraphica recently found in Egypt, called the Nag Hammadi collections, which are the Gospels of Thomas and Philip, specifically the Targums, rabbinic literature, and other works of historical analysis and synthesis, they've all transformed the early study of, or the study of early Judaism. These are benefits for our study, not only of the account of the early church, but of the culture and the time period in which it blossomed. Although some of this material cannot be deemed divinely inspired, it does allow us to better understand the time period and struggles in which the early church operated. In most cases, we cannot treat this Jewish literature as sources reliable for the New Testament writers, but we must see them as evidence of the ideas and terminologies utilized. That's Green. However, problems do emerge with pseudepigraphica, as some of this material was exclusive to certain communities, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls. We know these writings all belong to the library of the Qumran community. Some of the literature was written within the community and is unlikely to have been known outside the community, except for other Essenes. But clearly the community also read extra-canonical religious literature that was not peculiarly its own and had wide or limited circulation among other Jews. Therefore, it's unlikely that the entire Jewish world could have known about this material. Therefore, it's deemed unreliable. I got a quote from an EBSCO host. The compositional history of one Enoch is very complex, and scholars have generally concluded that the present form of the text is a compilation of 5 related but distinct works from 2 appendices, some in ancient history, while others even more recent. And I'll list that in my bibliography. In conclusion, when Paul wrote to Timothy, neither give heed to fables or endless genealogies which minister questions rather than godly edifying, perhaps he was referring to some of this apocryphal or pseudepigraphical thought. Later he says, some have swerved, turning aside to vain jangling, desire to be teachers of the law, understanding neither what they say or what they affirm. To Paul, preachers should focus on biblical truths from the Old Testament canon in his day, and to us, the entire Bible. It's my estimation whether 2 Peter, James, or Jude were actual epistles written by the acclaimed authors or simply an accumulation of their work pieced together by apprentices after their passing really is inconsequential. The important thing is that we have these wonderful letters which speak to us, building up our faith. These directives keep us from falling, helping to present us faultless before God's presence. A little play on Jude's words. Now, regarding authorship, there are various levels of authenticity. First, there's literal authorship, where the author writes from his own hand. Second is when the author dictates to a secretary. This is called dictation. There's posthumous authorship, apprentice authorship, and honorable pseudepigraphy. Last is outright forgery, and that's when a writer deceptively uses the name of a deceased person to advance a purpose which the suspected author may not have subscribed to and unfortunately isn't able to contradict. Much of what the compilers of the canon had to sift through were these various levels of authenticity. I'm sure there were some quality passages left out, such as some of the things from the Book of Enoch. However, what was finally compiled and authenticated has been deemed inspirational and has been delivered over pulpits for thousands of years, allowing the church to grow and mature.